What would you recommend that we do to reform the curriculum for people like our students who are interested in learning about the prison? Kira raises the idea that perhaps there's unlearning to be done, and that we're kind of moving people in the wrong direction in terms of thinking about this, and I'd like to hear about that.
That's a good question. So,
go ahead, Warren.
There is, I think the education, that's part of the reason I come and do these things. I go and talk to some criminology classes and stuff too here in SFU and UBC. My goal, my ideal, my hope and dream is that as the next generation of policymakers that, you know, incrementally there can be some influence from the inside, from having a different perspective from the standard and historic theory. Even as it evolves, there's still, like you say, a lot of it is misguided. A lot of it is well thought out and well structured and articulated. I don't think it's very productive. And another point I'd like to add to that end of what you're saying there about protecting the public. Yes, you know, we have to exclude prisoners from the public if we're saying we're protecting the public. And we also fail to look at the long-term consequences. If we're not healing and reforming and rehabilitating people while they're in there, they all get out, except for, you know, Clifford Olson and those kind of guys. You know, we all get out at some point. I'm doing a life sentence. I'm out here living and moving and working in the community. What do we need to do to protect society in the long run, including me, right? I think as far as education and the curriculum goes, it would be nice if there could be some form of, not partnership exactly, but some way of integrating the education process in a way that people are able to access the prisons and understand the policy as it evolves and question and have an actual meaningful impact on the determination of the evolution of policy. Like, okay, if somebody comes in with fresh eyes and questions how something is being done and why is it being done and wouldn't it be better to do it this way, you know, how do we get the system to be open to that kind of change instead of, you know, steadfastly holding to its control and the fear and terror that, you know, if they, you know, resile on any point that the whole house of cards is going to fall down. It seems to be the way they look at it, that one change is going to undermine the entire authority of the system. And so they resist it and become totally hostile towards it. I mean, they use greyhound therapy for years, that, you know, guys like me would wake up at 2 in the morning surrounded by guards, handcuffed, shackled, thrown in a bus, and get thrown in a solitary cell in Newfoundland. And, you know, no phone calls, no visits. And by the time I managed to squirrel some information out to guys in the population to contact my lawyer, to contact my family, 2:30 in the morning, back in the bus, off to Edmonton. You know what I mean? And just keep moving you around until you say, okay, I give. And they did that for decades here in Canada. You know, and it still happens sometimes. When people, I've seen it happen since I got out. Guys were trying to start and form a prisoners union, and they all got separated and shipped around the country. They had like a 5-month hunger strike, and it didn't change a thing in there. As soon as the strike ended, boom, the organizers were gone, different seg units across the country, and the rest of the prisoners, and yep, that's what happens when you mess with the man. We just keep our heads down and get out as soon as you can. Don't upset them. Yeah, from a teaching perspective, I think it's, I mean, in criminology, I mean, we need to have people that are going to be able to influence legal reform and policy at, you know, the highest levels of government. And, you know, so how do you create that influence? How do you inspire it and foster room for growth so that it can get in there and get a foothold and actually make some change? I have no idea. That's a really good question. I mean, I wish I knew the answer or even part of it. I'd be out there trying to make it happen somehow.
I mean, it's almost like you're asking a curriculum committee question. Like at some departmental meeting, how can we teach students better to be more successful in critical the $64,000 question. How do you get students to denormalize everything around them? I mean, that's the larger.
I think that's the big issue,
That's
yeah.
that's the whole question of having a kind of an arts education, right? We're not involved in vocational training, although some, I think, perhaps some in our department and some people in this university believe that the purpose of a degree is to get people job ready, and so they do see it as kind of vocational training, either getting people ready to apply for police service or into corrections, or to work in some other kind of frontline work in terms of public safety. But I think myself and you and others in our department don't see, I think, you know, our role as criminologists or as members of the department as just vocational training. So if we're not vocationally training, then I think the whole job is to create critical thinkers, meaning to denormalize everything. Yeah. So how do you do that in a course? I think that is hard because at the same time we're also, you know, in a course, in an introductory course, you're also trying to teach people about the existing law. Right? So then when you teach that, people immediately say, oh, well then that's the law. So that's the coda, that's the framework that's been pre-established, that's the normal. So I want to know more about that. So you're in a kind of a catch-22 because you also want to say, well, yes, that's the law, but it's maybe not so great and not so normal. And yet that might be too early a moment to introduce that because then people become incredibly confused. What are you saying? So I think it is a complicated question, other than maybe dropping people into some kind of experiential learning about prisons and courts.
I don't think you need to go that far. I think what we're doing incorrectly now is we're teaching empathy as a skill.
Oh, I see.
As like a vocational training, right? You can teach empathy in an educational way, right? I think from my experience, when I learned about what happened in Canada with reserves and putting people through that, like I learned that in an educational setting, but it was taught to me in a way that raised empathy. So I know that's just a small example with residential schools. But learning that and seeing that happen can really affect change without it being taught like, you should be empathetic to these people because they're like you. I think you're dumbing it down a lot if you think your students need to know that. I think most people are empathetic by nature, right? I think that we need to start teaching more about the injustices that happen within prison. And then I think more people, just from learning about that and understanding, I don't think they need it spoon-fed to them that people in prison are prisoners and that they're people, right? Like, it doesn't need to be so dumb. We aren't that stupid.
Yeah, you're not teaching people how to feel something, you're showing them the truth of the situation.
Yeah, just show them the
that
truth
they
and
can
we'll get
appropriately
it.
appreciate the situation, right?
Right? And we're not even being shown the truth, right?
No.
And
And also the result of prison, what prison foments, like when someone gets out, they literally have they get future shock, they don't know how to cope. So, as well as the humiliation of family members of them, like a relative in prison. So, not just the injustices of what prison does on the inside, but what the injustice prison causes on the outside as well.
yeah, like society can be more empathetic too if we allow people to like go in. Like you even said, your family couldn't go into the prison to see what was happening to you. They can only imagine, right? And then at some point they hit that wall. But you know, if they go in and see it, then they'll want it to change, right? And the issue now is we have all these barriers to even seeing it, right? To even learning about it. Like we're not taught any of this. Like who here was taught about residential schools in K to 12? Yeah.
Like
That's fucked up.
Yeah, like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
like 5 minute
Yeah.
spiel about it.
It was
Yeah.
mentioned, but I think it took us all after high school to figure out how terrible it was.
Yeah.
That stuff, right? Like just like, oh, the culture, da da da. We don't learn
Yeah.
about what happened to the people, like.
Nothing. I think experiential kind of learning would be the key there. And not kind of like not quite like a practicum, because you don't want the students to be isolated and, enveloped and overtaken by the culture there. You want to have some type of volunteer activity that goes on where you go as a group and you interact with prisoners. And the goal isn't to have a didactic kind of presentation of material and teaching and principles, but to let them just connect with people on a human level and get to see what they're doing and hear about what's going on in their lives. And empathy and compassion will arise on its own. And whether you come into a field later working where you have an influence there or you're somewhere totally removed, that experience can help your influence within the social fabric of our country and, incrementally have some kind of impact, hopefully. Yeah, lots of hope.
Can prisoners be treated as humans? No.
Yes.
Okay, so does anyone have any last minute thoughts?